Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I wanted to mention a conversation I just had with someone I met the other day. I have enormous respect for him, and it's for a rather strange reason, because I wish that my childhood had been like his. I had a really bad childhood as an autistic. Really, really, really bad. My psychiatrist predicted that I would spend the rest of my life on disability. The opposite happened. I became a very wealthy man. I became a college professor, tenured, an author, a podcaster, as you can see here, and more. So there has literally been a transformation in my life since my childhood. This person I was chatting with, who I just met about, I think 2 days ago at a meeting, it was that same meeting I mentioned that was that all-day meeting that ended at 4 p.m. I told them about my childhood as an autistic and how difficult things were for me, how I would have constant panic attacks, how I would literally go crazy when I would hear the B sound or the P sound. And one of the phrases that would repeat in my head all the time was bomb boy. What that meant is that I associated all boys, including myself, with bombs, which is, of course, included in the letter B. And I associated anything that began with B, including boy, with bombs. So I had sensory distortions, common autistic experience. Sounds that were relatively low sounded enormously loud to me. Enormously loud. It would drive me crazy. I would get beaten up on my way home from school every day as a child, without fail. And I would not fight back because I did not know how to fight back. In retrospect, I think I should have at least tried, which I did not, because I panicked. I panicked. And when I panicked, I froze. I froze. I would sometimes walk home with a briefcase of my books and throw the briefcase down into the sewer, just on impulse. Obviously, I would have to get new books. Horrendous. I would walk through a tunnel at Jones Beach on Long Island when we would drive out to Long Island. And the tunnel would connect the ocean side of Jones Beach with the bay side. And it was a relatively short tunnel. But I was terrified of that tunnel because of the echoes. I could not stand echoes. Echoes would drive me crazy. The feeling of wind on my face would drive me crazy. When I would go to the optometrist to have eye drops put in. My parents and the optometrist would have to hold me down. I mean, now I give myself eye drops. I would have similar sensations, though not quite so bad, when getting haircuts. Haircuts I did not like, but I could tolerate them. I could not tolerate turtleneck shirts or sweaters. Simply could not tolerate them. For some reason, my mother would buy them for me, but I would never wear them. I couldn't stand them. They were tormenting. My life as a child was one of complete and utter torment. Torment really is perhaps the best word to describe my childhood. Back to this person I just chatted with on the phone who I met the other day. He is also autistic. Fortunately, his life, from what he said, does not sound as bad as mine. I mean, my childhood was really, really bad. I was a really, really bad functioning autistic. It is a miracle that I am who I am right now. I am nothing like I was back then. Nothing. No comparison. I don't even look like the same person. I had somebody the other day who looked at me. He had not seen me since I was in my teens, and he said, "Mark, if you had not told me who you were, I would not have recognized you." I looked into the mirror and I thought to myself, my goodness, he's right. I would not recognize me either. Back to the story of this person. He said to me that the way he survived was simply by keeping to himself. If only it had been that easy for me. If only it had been that easy. I'm happy for him. Really, really happy for him. I don't have any jealousy at all. I'm always happy when I meet another autistic and that autistic has had a better life than I had. Although I'm grateful for my life right now. But anyway, he said that he simply would keep to himself, and that got him through school. I said to him on the phone, I said, well, I wish I could do that, except I would periodically pee in my pants, and a puddle of water would develop around my desk. Obviously, it was very noticeable. Why? Why did I do that? I don't know. I really don't know. I have tried to take myself back to that time and think about who I was then and why I thought the way I did. The only thing I could think of is that I was so afraid of change, even a change in asking the teacher if I could have a hall pass to go to the bathroom, that I would rather pee in my pants, which I did all the time, all the time, all the time. In 7th grade, I was in band. I played the timpani, which I did as a protest against myself, which I understand now is a common phenomenon. You literally do the thing that you fear the most. I fear drums because of the bomb sound. The bomb sound. So I did play the timpani. occasionally the snare as well. As we were taking a bus trip up to Montreal from New York, from Long Island, not really that long, about 6 hours. It's a relatively short drive because it goes through a relatively narrow path of New York to get up there. It's much longer, for example, getting to Buffalo. So as I was sitting in the bus, again, I started peeing. And a massive puddle developed around me on the seat. I don't know how I made it. Somehow, the band instructor, Mr. Burke, got me out of it. He understood my problem. He later became good friends with my mother because they met with my father in a social gathering. And I mean, he was a great guy. He was a wonderful guy. And I was happy that my mother and my father had become good friends with him and his wife. I never knew his wife, but I'm sure if she married him, she must have been wonderful too. So, my childhood, a childhood filled with electric shock treatments, ECTs, electroconvulsive therapy, 12 of them when I was 11 years old. A standard treatment back then for my disorder, autism, which back then in the DSM-1 and DSM-2, DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, was called schizophrenia childhood type because they did not understand what autism was. But if you read the description of schizophrenia childhood type, it defines it as autism. So they knew it was autism. The problem was they thought was that autism was schizophrenia. Now, these days, electroconvulsive therapy, to my understanding, is only used for adults and only for adults with depression. There are some people who seek it out because it works very well. Apparently, it works better than antidepressants. But you don't give it to a little kid, which is what they did back then. I had, for all intents and purposes, with minor exceptions, total amnesia for a year. I forgot everything, including math, reading, and writing. I forgot everyone except my parents. My parents I remembered, but aside from them, I forgot everyone. It was a tragedy. Could it have been avoided? Well, yes and no. I think it could have been avoided if psychiatrists had been more careful. But given the fact that autism was defined as schizophrenia, and in adults, autism was defined as paranoid schizophrenia, or as it said, schizophrenia paranoid type. How in the world is autism paranoia? I don't get it. But so be it. Given the fact that autism was defined as schizophrenia, and they did not know what to do with me. Hell, I did not know what to do with me. So if they did not know, that's understandable. They had good company, me. But the idea of giving electric shock treatments to an 11-year-old kid, I was not depressed. I was not depressed. I mean, I had situational depression because of how I was treated, but I was not chronically depressed. I know that because I am me, and I remember I was depressed when I got beaten up by other kids or later by my father. That depressed me, as I think it would depress anyone. It wasn't a neurological thing, I don't think. I don't think. I was also on really, really heavy psychotropic drugs. The one I remember is Thorazine, but I was on many others as well. It turned me into a zombie. Literally a zombie. I was how I was able to function to get through school, how I was never once left back is a mystery to me. But I wasn't. I was never once left back. I guess, with all due humility, that is a tribute to my brain, to my intelligence. Because I think that under ordinary circumstances, I would have been left back at least once, maybe more than once. But no, I wasn't. Even when I was sent to that special school, BOCES, which was basically a stopgap measure before going to what was called back then reform school. I was sent there because I was being beaten up. Makes sense, right? But they tried to protect me. They didn't know what to do with me in the school. So they said, let's get rid of him. Let's send him to BOCES. Then, once I was there, I was surrounded by kids, most of whom I think, although I'm not qualified to say this, but I'll say it anyway, had various types of other psychological disorders like ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder. I was abused much more there than I was at the public school. Plus, I found out that I could not get a high school diploma. I would have to get a GED, which is a high school equivalency diploma. I protested, and they let me back into the school. My first day back, a teacher that I never really got along with for some reason walked up to me and said, "Why did you come back?" I felt like cursing her out, but I didn't. I just stared at her. I stared at her. And I said, because I wanted to. And she gave me a dirty look and walked away. It was none of her business. None of her business. But she made it her business. Why? I have no idea. Because she hated me. Just as when I was in 4th grade at PS 46 in Bayside, Queens, in New York City, Mrs. Lundeen, my teacher, said something with her back to me, and I raised my hand and asked her to repeat it because I didn't hear it. So what did she do? She walked over to me, she pulled my ear back like that, and she screamed it into my ear. I complained to my mother. She complained to the principal. So, what happened? The next year, Mrs. Lundeen became an assistant principal. That was her punishment. I had very, very few defenders. In fact, I'm trying to think of any. My mother, sort of, although she was kind of wrapped up in her own world. She was an extraordinarily self-centered person. Anything that brought her personal pleasure, she liked. I did not bring her pleasure, so she really, really hated me. She divided the world into angels and demons. I was a demon. But in spite of that, she did try at times to help me, like with the BOCES issue. But she believed in anything that she thought made sense to her without checking into it. So she eventually sent me to the North Nassau Mental Health Center, which was the psychiatric center of the person who started orthomolecular psychiatry, also called megavitamin psychiatry. By the way, it doesn't work. It no longer exists. There is no orthomolecular psychiatry anymore. But at that time it existed. And I agreed to take the vitamins. I figured, well, vitamins. But then the first day, I saw that included among the vitamins, was Thorazine. I said that to my mother. Why is there Thorazine in there? And she said, her response, she said, Mark, you are such a smart person. You are such a smart person that you recognize that. Smart my ass. I had taken Thorazine for my entire childhood. I knew what it looked like. It had nothing to do with my intelligence. I mean, I will give my intelligence credit when credit is due, but that was not an intellectual feat. I simply recognized something that I had taken my entire life. And I said, no, I will not take Thorazine. So my mother and I had a fight. Sadly, I backed down. I should not have backed down. What was she going to do? Force it down my mouth? But I backed down. And I took it for about a month, I believe. Then I decided I am not going to take it anymore. My mother started doing her usual bit of whining and whining and whining, which never had any effect on me at all. I found it to be entertaining, to be honest. I liked to see her whine because I knew that she was unhappy, and I wanted her to be unhappy because, well, whatever. It didn't bother me that she was upset. So she called my old psychiatrist who had moved out to California, which is why I stopped seeing him, which is why I started going to the stupid orthomolecular place that my mother found out about in a Dear Abby column, of all places. And my psychiatrist said that he had just finished writing an article with some colleagues on it. And by all of their research, it did not work. I heard only one side of the conversation, my mother's side. So I'm interpreting indirectly what he said. And she said, it does not work. And he said, yes. And he said, but I read about it in, he said, I read about it in Dear Abby. She actually said that to him on the phone. As if Dear Abby is a psychiatric authority. Whatever. It was a weird home. But he said, no, it does not work. And so I would recommend that you stop going to them. My mother said, well, then what do I do? Where do I go? This was the first time that I am happy with something my psychiatrist said. My psychiatrist was on an ego trip, like many psychiatrists, especially back then, were. A really big ego trip. He would constantly threaten me with being sent back to the psychiatric hospital, to Creedmoor State Hospital, which back then had a children's wing. It no longer does. He said, well, my suggestion is that you do nothing. And she said, do nothing? Yeah, do nothing. She listened to him. Charles Rabiner, my old child psychiatrist, was one of my mother's angels, fortunately. Now, he shouldn't have been, because he was a jerk, but he was. And so my mother ultimately went along with her. And that was the end of the problem. I gradually got better. The bullying soon stopped after I got back from BOCES. Now kids were interested in dating. They didn't care about me anymore. And I became more well-balanced. And obviously, I ended up getting a bachelor's, a master's, and a Ph.D. Well, an associate's first. I don't want to leave the associates out because I like the associate's degree, having taught at a community college for the last 30 years. Regardless, I was okay, and I got better and better. And then I had some problems over the years, but for the most part, I was okay. And now I am still basically okay. Not 100%, but I can function. I am truly a high functioning autistic, a very high functioning autistic, which I definitely was not as a child. How that happened? A miracle. Part of it, I think, is related to the story of Horia, which I told you, that Holy Spirit who came to me and gave me theory of mind, empathy, or intersubjectivity, as I prefer to call it. But it was before then, too. Even before Horia came to me, I had gotten a lot better. I had no love, no intersubjectivity, no empathy, but I could fake it. I was a good actor. I could imitate empathy. That's how I got by imitating empathy. But I didn't feel it. But after Horia came to me, I felt it. And my life was transformed. So, point of this podcast: First world psychiatry. First world psychiatry. What a mess. Now, third world psychiatry isn't that great either. The problem with first world psychiatry is that first world psychiatry is a money-making business. It also incorporates many of the evils of American culture, including judgmentalism and a lack of empathy displayed by many psychiatrists. So what I went through in my childhood was true first world psychiatry. I saw the worst of it. Now I'm seeing the best of it. So there is a good side to it. It's not all bad. My last two psychiatrists have been good people. Not perfect, but good. But back then it was just absolutely awful. And I have since met other people who have had my life. I am not the only person who had my life. Other people did too. Almost exactly the same, from the treatments to the experiences. And they are now diagnosed as autistics too. There are sadly a lot of people around my age walking around who have never had their diagnosis corrected from schizophrenia childhood type. And perhaps it has never been explained to them that in the DSM-1 and the DSM-2, schizophrenia childhood type is defined as autism. And so if you look in psychology today, for example, I read an article the other day, it says that anyone diagnosed with schizophrenia childhood type should now be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. But I didn't know that back then. I learned that from Jim Hunter, my late psychiatrist, who died a rather painful death, sadly. And of course, my current psychiatrist, Doug, agrees with him. In any event, this was a bit of a deviation from the normal things that I talk about here, but it is a commentary on the first world, although not exactly in the way I ordinarily do it, and upon the abusiveness of the first world, which is what I saw. The hate, the hate, the lack of concern. I never saw any concern in Charles Rabiner until that time when he advised my mother to stop the orthomolecular psychiatry. That was the first time, and it still amazes me. But after that, Buddy and I, Charles Rabiner and I, became friends over the phone. And I would call Buddy every once in a while. That was his nickname. And we would chat. So our relationship changed entirely. I would say we had more of a collegial relationship. Him as a psychiatrist and me with a Ph.D. in sociology. So sometimes things do work out, although often not in the way that one might expect or that one might desire. But I can't complain, especially when I see what is happening in Gaza and Ukraine and Haiti and other third world places and countries around the world. How can I complain? I can tell the story, and maybe it sounds like complaining because when I talk about it, it saddens me. I can't help that. It certainly was not a pleasant time in my life. But in retrospect, how can I complain given where I am relative to where the people in Ukraine or Gaza or Haiti are right now? I could, but I think it would be intellectually and spiritually dishonest. So I will express gratefulness that I am where I am right now and not complain beyond that. Gratefulness is better than complaining. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.